Please like and subscribe to this channel and press the bell icon to get new video updates.
Vintage radio item with little known facts or lore. The AGA Model L3 of 1927. Their first mains-powered, DC mains, radio. There is also a AC mains version. But first, how did we get here? In the 1890s, experiments in attempts to produce aluminum in arc furnaces results in the discovery of calcium carbide that, when combined with water, produces acetylene gas. When burned, it can produce a brilliant white light. When burned with pure oxygen, combustion temperatures are high enough for practical welding. In Sweden, Gustaf Dalén develops a steel storage tank that stores the gas inside in a highly porous cementitious matrix filled to 50% with acetone. The gas dissolves into the acetone and is held at pressures of about 250 psi. This practical storage of the gas leads to the formation, in 1904, of a stock holding company called Gas Accumulator. The already accomplished inventor and engineer, Gustaf, joins the new enterprise and develops an acetylene-powered beacon for lighthouses, ocean buoys, marking navigation channels and hazards. Acetylene lamps are a vast improvement over various oil lamps. He develops an ingenious sun-powered gas valve to conserve gas in the daytime, making the buoy a highly successful product. Dalén advances to the managing director of the organization in 1909. In 1912, Dalén was left blind following an explosion that occurred while he was testing safety devices on acetylene cylinders. Later that year, he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Physics for his invention of automatic regulators for use in conjunction with gas accumulators for illuminating lighthouses and buoys. This is not the end of Gustaf's leadership in inventing. He continues on in his position until his death in 1937. Gustaf Dalén was a great optimist who took numerous misfortunes in his stride. He didn't just lose his sight, but suffered financial losses as well. During the early 1920s, he and the AGA Company experienced severe economic difficulties, and Dalén lost his entire fortune, but he managed to get back on his feet. In 1932, AGA suffered another financial crisis after the infamous Kruger crash that came close to destroying the Swedish banking system. Dalén went and ordered a number of pens with the text "Var optimist," or in other words, be an optimist. As soon as he met someone who was complaining, he took out a pen and fastened it to that person's lapel. He himself also wore a pen in full view of everyone. Copies of the original, the so-called Optimist pen, are available to buy in the Dalén Museum today. They do not have the dark background. So what the heck has all this got to do with AGA getting into the radio business? Signal buoys can't be seen in heavy fog. Bells and horns are not always effective. In 1916, Dalén has the idea to design a CO2-powered spark transmitter carried on the buoy. A periodic brief puff of gas would drive a dynamo long enough to send a burst of code to ID the buoy, the range to be only a mile or two. He needed a sensitive crystal receiver and developed some sort of copper oxide rectifier. The Great War interrupted development. In 1919, AGA, together with L.M. Ericsson and ASEA, formed a new company, SRA, which originally had the sole aim of developing radio technology. When SRA then wanted to go into manufacturing, patent issues put a damper on that idea. Later, this was solved when the Italian Marconi Company became a minority owner of SRA, and in this way, SRA could then use patent-protected technology from Marconi. In 1927, L.M. Ericsson became the sole majority owner of SRA when it acquired the shares of the other two owners, AGA and ASEA. Marconi remained the minority owner it originally was. AGA did not attempt to market a broadcast radio until sometime in 1925. Radio broadcasting experiments began in 1921. The first was handled by the Swedish Telegraph Agency, the government authority with the responsibility for radio technology, and was sponsored by SRA, the private company with commercial interest in radio equipment. By 1922, radio amateurs were forming clubs that were using their equipment for broadcasting activities. It looked for a while that Sweden was on a path to an American broadcasting model of private companies financed by commercial advertising and support from radio manufacturers. The start of transmissions also meant the interest in radio receivers increased. To own a receiver, a certain government license was required. In 1923, there were less than 5,000 licenses in a country of about 6 million. But at the end of the following year, the number was 40,000. The radio boom was underway. However, governmental objections developed, resulting in the establishment of a state-controlled radio service, the Swedish Broadcasting Service. It was to be administered by a private broadcasting corporation, financed by listener license fees, with many, but not all, similarities to the British and German broadcasting models. One of the first amateur radio experimenters to make broadcast in 1922 was Uno Sarnmark in the city of Gothenburg. Little is known about his broadcasts, but I do know that he was marketing some very sophisticated radio kits, perhaps as early as 1925. How would you like to have this superheterodyne in your collection today? Uno and one K.G. Eliasson were among the founders of Sweden's oldest radio club, the Broadcasting Amateurs of Gothenburg, in 1923. Uno ends his experimental transmissions as soon as Eliasson builds a 100-watt experimental transmitter that goes on the air January 4th, 1924. Beginning with a premiere transmission on January 15th, he is on the air most days for an hour or two. At right is an interesting picture showing a bare, double-button microphone element suspended simply from rubber bands. There is a 7-minute video dated 1925. I presume this was a broadcasting setup after the Swedish Broadcasting Service had taken over control of all broadcasting in the country, but the same primitive microphone is shown. Curious. Eliasson is also the first to entertain the Swedish people by sending a live performance from the Opera House in Gothenburg on the 5th of March, 1924. The opera name was The Beggar's Student, a circa 1881 Austrian operetta in 3 acts, with music by Carl Mülleke. The Swedish Broadcasting Service, the independent, politically established company with sole right to broadcast national radio in the service of the public, started its regular programming on the 1st of January, 1925. Initially, two-thirds of the shares were owned by powerful newspaper organizations and one-third of the shares by leading radio manufacturers. This programming was free from advertising. New Year's Day, Sven Jerring announces the High Mass, the very first to be broadcast on the air from the newly formed radio service. At that time, the radio service had only 7 employees and only broadcast on one channel for a couple of hours every day. From 1922, shops in all major cities were filling with domestic and imported radio apparatus. British Western Electric is well represented with these products not seen here in the USA for the most part. There were a number of small Swedish companies making primarily parts to support the smaller radio makers and hobbyists. From 1924, Baltic Radio is making radio parts. They soon published construction booklets and then began selling kits of parts. This delightful photo is used in the March 1927 cover of Radio Lyssnaren, a radio program guide published from 1927 to 1932. It shows Sweden royalty, Princess Ingrid and Prince Carl Johan, at the controls of a deluxe radio made in Malmö, presumably in 1925 or 1926. It features 2 stages of RF, a detector, and 2 stages of audio. An advertising brochure tells the prospective customer that users have received transatlantic broadcast on this Type 5 receiver. As an American with no skills in Nordic languages, these 2 advertisements caught my interest. Time to ask Google Translate for some answers. The number 1 advert tells us, every radio amateur should always have a can of Vim on hand. When you have finished working on your equipment, clean your hands with a little Vim. With Vim, you can also keep your own radio set in first-class condition. Apply a little Vim on a damp cloth to rust, dirt, and stains on all parts of the apparatus, leaving one beautiful shine. Vim. And the number 2 advert definitely brings a smile. Treats at radio parties. For treats at the radio, there is nothing better than bananas. They are easy to handle, but for all their peeling and devouring, there is no noise to interfere with the entertainment. At a radio party, you mustn't forget bananas. As mentioned earlier, AGA's fortunes did not go well after the Great War. Although they were members of the Radio Technology Consortium, they did not attempt to market any radio products until sometime in 1925. This simple but nicely made crystal set with variometer tuning. The adjustable cat's whisker galena detector module plugs into the front panel. It was manufactured by an AGA subsidiary, AGA Lux, in Gothenburg. In 1927, this small production was transferred to a much larger new AGA factory at Lille within the Stockholm archipelago. In 1927, AGA Radio brings its first 2 radios to market, the L2 and the L3. They claimed them to be the first all-in-one European home receivers, mains-powered and complete with built-in loudspeaker. The advertisement proclaims, "How convenient, isn't it, to have the whole radio in a single cabinet without troublesome batteries? AGA radio appliances take all power direct from the lighting network. They are plugged into a wall socket in the same way as an electric lamp. More than 2,500 receivers in use. The advertising on the right by AGA Gas Accumulator, at that time well known for their home appliances, raises a smile by proclaiming, "The radio problem's simple solution, the radio that works with gas." This 1928 receiver mock-up for a radio show of the model L2 is said to have contained 30 of the standard speakers used in the production set and said to have produced very good low-frequency volume. With a single program channel for the nation until 1935, most citizens did not need high sensitivity or high selectivity receivers. As we have already seen, there were indeed high-performance radios on the market for the DX Hound, but definitely they were in the minority. Time to explore the insides of these simple radios. But first, here are two glamour shots of the second L3 that I acquired. On the front panel, there is only an on-off switch and a tuning knob attached directly to the shaft of the tuning capacitor. The large brass knob on the back of the cabinet is to adjust the loudspeaker clearance of the iron reed from the magnetic poles. This is a critical adjustment, the reed moving only a few thousandths of an inch during normal operation. There is a single tune circuit connected to a conventional aerial and ground connection, or the option of using the mains connection as an antenna. There are one of three plug-in inductances you choose depending on your local radio network station frequency. There is a simple anode bend detector with two stages of RC-coupled audio amplification driving a high-impedance pin driver loudspeaker. This version is for the Edison-style direct current mains distribution networks that were being installed as early as the mid-1880s in prosperous industrial cities in Europe and North America. This DC mains infrastructure survived in some locales into the World War II era. Large iron core chokes and a 2 microfarad capacitor filter all the electrical noise coming from the main supply. In Europe, it would not be until the middle 1930s that vacuum tube technology would advance to the point that cost-effective broadcast receivers could be made that would be run directly from both AC or DC mains. As mentioned earlier, 3 tuning range coils were available. You chose only the coil best covering the national program transmitter in your locale. The coverage ranges are 160 to 350, 240 to 600 meters, medium wave, or 800 to 1700 meters to include the long wave radio station in Motala, Sweden. Even though this simple receiver was introduced in 1927, it was manufactured into 1930. Note the January 1929 test date on this condenser in one of my examples of the L3. Ceramic core wire-wound resistors dissipated considerable heat to drop the mains voltage low enough to light the 4-volt filament tubes. Most high-value resistors for RC coupling are hermetically sealed in glass. They frequently maintain their design resistance value even at 100 years. The unusual celluloid speaker cone appears to have been first used in a Hyperion brand standalone radio loudspeaker made in Germany. The celluloid is transparent, with gold lacquer having been sprayed on the back side. The flange of the cone is simply rigidly attached to the cutout by some 18 small brass wood screws. Unfortunately, if this cone suffers even a tiny puncture, it will propagate to disastrous proportions. Only my friend Anders' exceptional packing skills resulted in this example surviving air freight to my home. My other L3 was not so lucky. The pen driver element of these first loudspeaker radios by the company are built in a round pot metal frame. Small wood screws hold it into a close-fitting plank spanning the inside of the cabinet. The pot metal expands and the wood panel shrinks, causing the panel to split. Frequently, the now loose driver puts enough force on the brittle celluloid cone to allow tears to propagate. That's why this cone developed multiple splits. Attempts to use acrylic adhesive tape simply cannot make a presentable repair. I've always wondered if a 3D printer could be used to make the oval cone mandrel for vacuum forming a new cone. In 1928, AGA bought out Baltic Radio, but operated it as a separate business. They already had a wide range of receivers, apparently offered primarily in kit form. From 1925, the Baltic brand became very popular in kit form. Everything from a crystal set to 4 and 5 valve sets that could pull in stations in the northern half of Europe. By 1926, they had added a 7-valve superheterodyne called the Super 10, and the following year they offered a Super 20 that, with some modifications, remained on offer into 1930. Even though AGA bought Baltic in 1928, it continued as a separate business until 1931, when the brand became AGA Baltic. I just could not pass up an opportunity to show you such a delightful graphic. I do not know the year of this particular model. They are proclaiming the AGA Baltic, the distance receiver. There was also another business division that served the western areas of the country. You can also find variants of these radios marketed under the brand AGA Lux. In 1931, another reorganization results in a new name of AGA Baltic Radio AB. In 1950, the brand becomes just AGA. At right is an advertisement showing their 1934 product line. By now, they have mains-powered superhets and TRF sets, but still offer a 2-valve local receiver. I have one. The notion of a local receiver would continue on in Sweden until about 1936. This 2-valve AGA Duo appears in the 1934 advertisements. Another DC mains receiver. I have found no published schematic, and I have not traced it out, but it appears to be a regenerative detector with pentode audio output tube. There are no markings on the tuning knob. You just turn the dial until you hear the station. There is a separate volume control. By this 1934 introduction date, it seems like there were enough medium wave stations for the national network that I speculate that AGA Baltic thought that this receiver did not need to receive the long wave station in Motala. The circuitry may be simple, but the material components are still of a high quality. The pen driver high-impedance loudspeaker has been improved and is now coupled to a paper free-edge cone. The audio quality is much superior to that of the previous celluloid cone speaker. My thanks to the following for information and photos for this lecture. My longtime correspondent and friend, Anders Widell in Lund, Sweden. He has been one of my primary guides in exploring the build-out of early radio communications technology in the rest of the world. The AGA Museum in the Netherlands is an outstanding online museum of all things AGA. Nearly 20,000 images covering all aspects of this highly diversified business. Also Wikipedia, radios from my own collection, and the Swedish public radio broadcasting system.
Please like and subscribe to this channel and press the bell icon to get new video updates.